Words they've used about David's demeanor in that courtroom, they've described it as off, as sociopathic.
Inside the murder case against the singer, David.
Crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric.
Prosecutors allege David killed this 14-year-old because she threatened to expose their illegal relationship, and that would have threatened his career.
I 100% believe in my heart and know in my heart he did this.
Here's a complete recap of the shocking preliminary hearing before the once rising star David heads to trial. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Sierra Gillespie.
David Anthony Burke is known for a song called Romantic Homicide, and only a sick, disturbed mind like David Anthony Burke would think that a homicide is romantic.
21-year-old R&B sensation David Anthony Burke, known professionally as the singer David, is officially headed to trial. That's what a Los Angeles County judge ruled just this week after a lengthy preliminary hearing that stretched into a second week. We've been following this case for months, since the body of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found in September 2025 in the front trunk of David's Tesla after it was towed from the Hollywood Hills. And we've reported on the details. The autopsy report, the grand jury proceedings, the arrest, but now, through the preliminary hearing, we're finally learning key details about the case against David, and prosecutors say it's damning.
There's so many elements of this that are horrifying in ways I don't think we can fully imagine.
Cameras weren't allowed inside the courtroom, unfortunately, but thankfully, our reporter, Julia Dang, was. She's giving us a front row seat to the mayhem in the courtroom.
He is disarmingly charming. People watching this line of questioning felt like it may have been bordering on the absurd.
Before we get into the intricacies of the prelim, let's begin with the basics. This is 21-year-old David Anthony Burke, known professionally as David, D4vd. He rose to fame as a Gen Z singer in 2022 for his hit song Romantic Homicide that peaked at number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's ironic now that David rose to fame for the song Romantic Homicide, as he's now charged with homicide, first-degree murder to be exact. This charge stems from a dismembered body that was found in the front trunk of David's Tesla on September 8th, 2025. For weeks, the Tesla had been abandoned, parked on the streets in the Hollywood Hills. Eventually, someone called it in and it was taken to a tow yard. There, workers started to notice a foul smell coming from the Tesla. Inside, LAPD officials would find a heavily decomposed and dismembered body. About a week later, the medical examiner identified the remains as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And we'll get into their alleged relationship shortly, because a lot came out at the prelim, but let's finish the timeline first. Now, it was odd. After a dismembered body was recovered in David's vehicle, and he wasn't arrested or charged, law enforcement publicly acknowledged that David was the prime suspect in the investigation into Celeste's death, but that was it. At least publicly. Behind the scenes, investigators were hard at work. In February 2026, a grand jury was called in Los Angeles County to review the evidence against David, and eventually, in April 2026, David was arrested. The LA County District Attorney filed multiple charges against him, including first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation. David was then taken into custody and has since been held without bail. Like I said, we've been following this case since it broke and bringing you updates with every development along the way. And we have all of those case details available on our app, by the way. It's called Law&Crime Plus. All of that information is really, really shocking, but none more eye-opening than what was revealed at the preliminary hearing. And this wasn't a quick little hearing. It took place over the course of 5 days in Los Angeles court. Now, the purpose of the prelim is to determine whether there is enough evidence to hold up at jury trial. And the burden of proof here in a prelim is much less than a regular trial. There, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a preliminary hearing, prosecutors only need to prove probable cause. Here's our reporter, Julia Dang.
The threshold here in this preliminary hearing phase is much lower. The prosecution only needs to show a probable cause. Think of that as kind of like a 51% threshold. But if this does go to trial, in order for a jury to convict, that's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Think of that as more like a 99.9% probability. So this is kind of like rehearsal for both sides. You know, they're testing out their witnesses. They're seeing how they perform on the stand as humans being questioned, you know, in front of a live audience under a lot of pressure. And we in the media, we're getting a sense of what questions might be asked during trial, how these witnesses are going to hold up, and how they might look and sound and feel to a live jury of their peers.
And it's clear the prosecution brought probable cause in this hearing. So let's start with day one of the prelim. That was Tuesday, July 21st. For the first time, gruesome autopsy photos were shown in open court.
Today, for the first time, we actually, in the courtroom, saw photos of that portion of the investigation. We actually saw the victim's remains in cadaver bags, still in the front trunk of that Tesla. It was something I don't think I have the words to describe. Reporters sitting in the courtroom actually stopped typing for a moment. There was a second where it felt like everybody just froze. And there was this too. For the first time today, we actually saw the parents of the victim, the mother and father of Celeste. They were both sitting in the courtroom. They were sitting directly in front of me. They were about 3 rows ahead of me. And I could see the victim's mother, Mercedes, just bowing her head down and crying when those evidentiary photos were shown to the courtroom.
Have you ever had one of those moments where your health is suddenly at the top of your priority list? Maybe it was after moving to a new city and you needed to find a new doctor, or maybe something unexpected happened. The reality is that most of us don't spend much time thinking about healthcare until we need it. With our sponsor ZocDoc, they make finding a doctor stress-free. ZocDoc is a free app and website to find local in-network doctors. I love being able to handle it all in the app or the website. It's been a total game changer for me. When I need a doctor's appointment fast, ZocDoc is there to help me. I'm able to make an appointment usually within 24 to 72 hours and even sometimes same-day care. With over 150,000 providers across more than 200 specialties in all 50 states, I can quickly find a doctor that fits my needs. Your health matters, and taking care of yourself shouldn't be complicated. Find and book the right doctor with ZocDoc. Head to ZocDoc.com/scandal to get started and check that appointment off your to-do list. That's ZocDoc.com/scandal. The first witness called was an LA County Sheriff's Department deputy who was called to David's home in the Hollywood Hills. Then 13-year-old Celeste out of Lake Elsinore, California, had been reported missing, and this deputy had to investigate.
So we heard from the senior deputy who actually went to the defendant's house up in the Hollywood Hills looking for this missing girl. Celeste would have been 13 at the time. We saw body camera footage of this senior deputy and his partner being let into that house by David, having a conversation with him, and then being shown photos on David's phone of Celeste. David said, yeah, he knew her. He met her online at the end of 2021. And he claimed to deputies that he hadn't seen her in months, but he pulled up her yearbook photo and said she told him she was 18 and not 13.
Now, this is important because David was charged with continuous sexual abuse of a minor. Here's the Rivas Hernandez family attorney, Patrick Steinfeld.
David Anthony Burke has taken the position that Celeste said she was 18. He didn't know she was a child, but he knew because he was told in February of 2024 that Celeste was only 13 years old. This is a strict liability crime, meaning that if he's 18 and she's 13 and they're having sexual relations, that is automatically a crime. He does not have a defense. However, he had direct knowledge of Celeste's age and continued in their sexual relationship. So I find it abhorrent that the defense attorneys are trying to put any blame whatsoever on this young child.
And we're going to talk more about this during our interview with Sidebar host Jesse Weber, because that will definitely be an uphill battle for David. But first, let's go back to the revelations in the prelim. Now, prosecutors say David and Celeste started talking in 2021, when she would have been just 11 years old, and David would have been 16 or 17. Now, they met via social media apps like Instagram and Discord, and for a while, prosecutors say their relationship remained virtual. That is, until 2023. They met reportedly for the first time in November of that year, and then tried to make it more permanent around Valentine's Day 2024. Celeste's parents then reported her missing on February 15th, 2024, and first responders did a wellness check at David's home the same month.
I think it also paints a great picture of just how convincing David can be as a liar, because when that body cam recording was taken in February of 2024. That's also the time period where we saw text message conversations today in court showing that David and Celeste were talking about something called OA, Operation Awesome, where they were plotting her departure, her runaway from her home in Lake Elsinore. And this struck me too. David appears to be the one pushing this. He's the one who keeps on asking her, do you have your bags packed? He tells her, bring everything you're going to use that I can immediately replace. Bring a bigger bag. Do you have everything packed? Are you ready to go? In one of these messages from that particular exchange, he calls that her runaway date, and I believe it was the day before Valentine's Day in 2024. He calls it the most important day of her life, aside from their anticipated wedding. Again, at this time, she is only 13 years old. This is just a couple weeks after, memorialized in these text messages, she apparently had an abortion.
That shocking revelation was paired with a description of David and Celeste's relationship.
This is actually the first time during the course of this preliminary hearing where Celeste is being presented as a living human, a young girl who is very much alive, a young girl who has a voice, who is expressing her feelings, her wants, her needs. Before this, she was a bag of decomposing body parts. She was an autopsy subject. She was a collection of limbs that had been severed from each other. But this afternoon, she became human. Again, as we heard about these photos and saw some images that, of course, were not child sexual abuse material that could be shown to the court, we saw Celeste at age 13 with what appeared to be a diamond engagement ring on her left ring finger. That's the finger that had David's name tattooed on it in red ink. We saw photos of the two of them kissing and cuddling in bed. We saw selfies of the two of them. Celeste with her red hair in the front seat of his Tesla. What prosecutors are doing right now, I think, is painting a picture of the nature of their relationship, just how much time they spent together, what they discussed, the future they talked about planning together. Previously, we heard the relationship characterized as maybe one-sided, right? It sounded like Celeste, this teenager, was pushing for more, and she was jealous of David's relationships with other women. So the text messages that were read aloud and shown to us in court today actually flip that narrative. That surprised me. I was not expecting that during testimony today. But it sounds like David is actually the one who brought up moving in together, spending more time together, a wedding, again, to this child. She was 13 at the time many of these conversations were documented. Having kids. He states in a text message to Celeste's number that they want 2 kids. And this came out as well. We have previously heard references to abortion and the Plan B morning after pill in their text message exchanges. But today we actually saw messages discussing an abortion appointment for Celeste in January of 2024. Now do the math there. Her birthday was September of 2010. She was 13 when this purported abortion took place.
That goes to the charge of alleged sexual abuse of a child, but this next part goes to motive in the alleged murder.
Turns out Asia Collins, who is an LA-based influencer, social media model, she's got a presence and a platform online. Turns out it was her association with David and their rumored friendship, or perhaps early stages of dating, that made Celeste incredibly upset. And that is what Celeste cites as the source of her anger when she is threatening David and telling him over text the night before he sent the Uber to pick her up and deliver her to his home. She tells him over text that she's going to, quote, mutilate his penis. She tells him that she doesn't want to see one more instance of David being tagged in posts with Asia Collins. Asia did come out on the record and state publicly, after the charges were filed against David, that she never dated him. She also came out and says she wants justice for Celeste.
And here's the key. The prosecution alleges Celeste was threatening David, saying she was going to expose him for child sexual abuse, and that's why he allegedly killed her.
In those messages that were shown to the court, that Detective Farrell read to us, Celeste tells David that she's going to ruin his career. She tells him that she's going to tell her father lies about him. She tells him that she has contact information for his business associates and for his mother. She tells him that she's going to call his mother, Colleen Burke, and tell her damaging information about David.
And prosecutors say David had a lot to lose financially.
And a lot of the questioning there, a lot of the cross-examination from both prosecutors and defense attorneys had to do with management of David's finances. Who is paying the bills, who is reviewing expenses, and just how much money was involved in this operation around this budding artist with what's been described as a multi-million-dollar music career ahead of him. Well, let me give you the numbers this witness laid out. He says between 2023 and the end of 2025, David raked in gross earnings of $10 to $11.5 million. And he says that record label head made anywhere from $3.5 to $4 million off of just David. Now, why is this relevant? This goes back to that first-degree murder charge and the special circumstances around that charge. There are 3 of them. Those special circumstances mean this is eligible for the death penalty here in California, even though California technically halted executions back in 2019. So one of those 3 special circumstances include murder for financial gain. Prosecutors allege David killed this 14-year-old because she threatened to expose their illegal relationship, and that would have threatened his career.
Prosecutors allege David killed Celeste on April 23, 2025. They say David called her an Uber to pick her up from her family's home in Lake Elsinore, California, and then drive her about 80 miles south to his home in the Hollywood Hills, where he allegedly murdered her. But here's where things get tricky. We can't say definitively how Celeste died.
They decided the cause and manner of death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was homicide, and they attributed her death to multiple penetrating injuries. Here's what's interesting, though. They did not identify what kind of weapon or tool caused those penetrating injuries, and they stopped short of actually calling it a penetrating injury caused by a sharp instrument. So they're not saying that she was definitely stabbed to death. And that's because of the advanced state of decomposition. They simply don't know for sure exactly how or what caused a lot of what they found.
What's more, the defense posed an interesting question to the medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho. Could Celeste have killed herself?
Marilyn Bednarski was the one asking Dr. Grant Ho these questions. She wanted to know first, is it helpful for somebody doing an autopsy to maybe have information about whether the decedent has a mental health history? Is it helpful to know if they are suicidal? Is it helpful to know if they are habitual drug users? So to each of those questions, Dr. Ho answered, potentially. So then she asked him, did you have any conversations with the decedent's relatives to explore those characteristics? He did not. So then she proceeded to ask about the injuries, right? The documented injuries, these penetrating wounds, the disruption to one of her ribs, the damage noted on her liver. And the defense wants to know, can you definitively link those observations that were made during the autopsy to what you see on the overlaying skin? And do you know exactly how that occurred? Are you able to definitively report that somebody else caused those injuries? And I think the broad answer to all of this is the advanced state of decomposition precludes a lot of definitive information. The deputy ME simply cannot say how this happened or who did this to her. I don't know if this is actually going to end up being a building block for an argument that Celeste killed herself, but it's certainly a line of questioning that I think any sharp defense attorney would explore.
The medical examiner can't definitively say what was used to dismember Celeste's body, so that part is still a question mark too. Chainsaws were recovered in David's home, so that did seem like a possibility, but per an LA criminologist and their testimony, that doesn't really seem likely.
And there was a lot of back and forth about the chainsaws. And here's why. Defense attorney Blair Burke noted there was no positive test indicating the possibility of blood on those chainsaws. So she kept on asking this LAPD witness for the prosecution why they didn't take those chainsaws into evidence. It sounded like she wanted to make the point that touch DNA, which they didn't test for, may have indicated something else, may have painted a more comprehensive picture of what exactly happened and who may have been involved, who else may have been involved, that is. But the criminalist was very sharp, very clear with her answers.
After David allegedly killed Celeste, prosecutors say he attempted to make a fake alibi, texting Celeste's phone asking, "Where are you at?" After that, David's phone and Tesla are both recorded heading 95 miles northwest to Santa Barbara County, the same place where Celeste's passport and personal items would later be recovered.
Now, I had questions when I first read some of the charging documents about why in the world anybody would take their own car especially a car tricked out with software like a Tesla, to do anything that might be criminal. And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. According to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Kachuma off of State Road 154 in Santa Barbara County.
And the defense says, okay, David's car and iPhone were making that trip, sure, but we can't prove it was David himself in the car with that phone.
We haven't seen any definitive proof yet that links David to the actual murder. We haven't seen any video that actually shows him committing that alleged act. We haven't heard from any witnesses who say they watched it happen. That is missing. We don't know what else they may present. This preliminary hearing, of course, is just one step in the process. This is not all of their evidence. These are not all of their witnesses. It's just a selection.
Celeste's remains were recovered in the Tesla months later, on September 8th, 2025. On day 2 of the prelim, the court heard harrowing testimony about the recovery of her remains in the Tesla.
We haven't heard about this detail before. According to this testimony from one of those 2 LAPD criminalists, there was actually blood identified in the brick flooring underneath where a car would have been parked. And that was underneath black rubber mats that were laid down on the garage floor in David's house. So what they seem to be painting a picture of here is blood leaking out of David's Tesla, seeping through those rubber floor mats and then seeping down into that brick flooring. Hearing that, and sitting right behind the victim's parents, it was jarring. There is so much evidence in this case that has been unsettling in truly shocking ways that I don't think I've experienced before anywhere. But being, in that courtroom with the victim's parents, I think that drives home the point that this is about a human. This is about a teenager. This is about a girl who was killed and dismembered. This is about justice for her. So this isn't just about how Celeste was killed, how her body was then mutilated. This is also about the cover-up efforts. I mean, somebody must have noticed, oh, it smells terrible. We got to do something to cover that up. So somebody actually opened up the front trunk, reportedly with the remains inside, and then put air fresheners in there to try and mask the smell. Multiple air fresheners, and all of that was, of course, documented and then taken into evidence.
The condition of the remains was disturbing, to say the least.
Dr. Ho described the beginning stages of maggots all around the victim's remains when he first got the case, when he was preparing to do the autopsy. I think it was a good morning for the victim's parents, both of her parents, who've been sitting in for most of this preliminary hearing, to not be in the courtroom.
On day 3, there was some drama in the courtroom, specifically about a witness who was no longer allowed to be called.
Now, according to the prosecutor in this case, the deputy DA, Beth Silverman, apparently Steve Fisher violated grand jury secrecy. And because of that, she made a request this morning for him to be excluded from the witness list. He was in the courtroom. He was sitting right by me. He stood up, acknowledged that request. There wasn't any kind of pushback. There was no argument there. And he walked out. So we're not going to hear from Steve Fisher in the courtroom as part of this preliminary hearing. But obviously, if this goes to trial, we do expect to hear from him.
Steve Fisher has been following this case for months. He's a private investigator who was hired by the property owner who was renting out that Hollywood Hills home to David. Fisher collected a whole host of evidence in this case. We're talking neighborhood surveillance footage, digital evidence between David and Celeste, and so much more. Being a key player in the case, it would then make sense that Steve Fisher took the stand in the preliminary hearing, but he didn't. Our own Jesse Weber spoke with him, and here's what he had to say.
I was a witness to the grand jury on 2 separate occasions. I have to throw this in there. Beth and I don't get along. She does not want me investigating the case. She did not like that before anything was moving in this case that we put out things like the burn cage was at the house, a chainsaw. We asked why these things weren't in evidence and why there was a 4 terabytes worth of surveillance footage from the house across the street that wasn't captured, wasn't gotten before it was overwritten. And so when I was initially served, I was told that by law, and this is not the law, but I was told this, I can no longer ever speak about the case again because I'm a grand jury witness, not even to my own client. And that's simply not true. I'm an investigator. I can talk about the case, and it's the grand jurors that are bound by the secrecy of the grand jury. I can speak about my own witness testimony if I want to. I just can't speak about anything that I learned from the grand jury, which I haven't even spoken about my own testimony. The reason I have to bring that up is on the second or third day, I was in the hallway waiting to get in the courtroom, and a gentleman came up to me who I had no idea who he was, in a suit, and he said, "I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Celeste family's attorney." It was Mr. Steinfeld. And I was sitting on the bench seats, and there's a lot of reporters around, so we went to the middle of the aisle of the courtroom, and he said some very nice things. They thanked me for keeping the story in the news, and I asked how the family was doing. And at that point, Beth Silverman came storming, and I mean storming, down the hallway and physically grabbed him, pulled him away, and said, "You are not allowed to talk to him. That is illegal." And I was really confused. And there was a lot of reporters around that were very confused what happened. But I didn't, say anything. But I didn't ultimately go in that day. But I went in the next day, and I was seated, and we were on the record already. And Beth Silverman said that she wanted to put something on the record, and she turned around and pointed to me and said, "He is not to be in this courtroom. He is broken grand jury secrecy laws. I'm having a warrant issued for his arrest." And said that he went up to the family who are witnesses, and he knows he's not allowed to talk to witnesses. He went up to the family yesterday and was trying to talk to them. And the judge, I got to say, the judge was super professional. She said, "Listen, she can have you excluded because of the grand jury thing." She's like, "I can't get into grand jury issues." And I said, "Listen, Your Honor, I'm fine leaving. I'm completely fine. I understand." And then that's when Beth threw he was trying to talk to witnesses, and I just asked her if I could say, Your Honor, can I put one thing on the record? And she's like, "If it has anything to do with the grand jury, please don't." And I said, "No, it doesn't." But I was actually approached by Mr. Steinfeld. I didn't even know who he was, and I didn't try to talk to them, even though I'm allowed to as an investigator. And at that time, I got to say, it was also very professional. He stood up and said, "Your Honor, I want to put on the record as well that I did approach Mr. Fisher." It was not and at that moment when he did that, Beth spun around and just started mouthing things to him, and she didn't even take the time to learn if it was the case that I came up to them. She just made these assumptions. Anyway, so I did exit the courtroom, but I'm glad it was at least put on the record that I wasn't breaking any rules or anything like that. But so, I did leave, and we'll see if I'm on the witness list or not.
A judge ultimately ruled that David's case will be taken to trial.
This was difficult evidence to even hear, but also the crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric. And it's not shocking that the evidence that would prove a horrific and barbaric crime would itself also be very difficult to deal with and to watch and listen to. But that is the evidence. We'll make sure that the jury eventually has all the evidence in order to reach a verdict in this case.
But before we move on to our interview with expert Jesse Weber, I have to talk about David's demeanor. A judge ruled he didn't have to be handcuffed, but he still needed to be shackled. And for the most part, he was pretty calm and emotionless in the courtroom, with a few notable exceptions, like this one.
When they were describing the incredibly explicit images of David and Celeste engaged in various types of sexual activity found on David's phone, I noticed David losing his composure a little bit. The entire time that I've been watching him in court during this hearing and the status conferences before this, he has been very still, very composed, staring straight ahead, responding when spoken to, and not giving away much with his body language or his facial expressions. Today, when they were talking about the photos, when they were talking about his dick pics, you could see him starting to fidget. It was like he was shrinking in his seat. He looked down at one point. I could see his right leg jiggling up and down.
Yikes, there's a lot to unpack in this case. And boy, do we have the perfect guest to do it all with. It's one of my favorite people, the host of Law&Crime Sidebar, the one and only Jesse Weber, back on Scandal again. Jesse, thanks for coming back with us.
Thank you. Favorite people. That's not even like
You
favorite colleague, favorite anchor, favorite person.
People.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
I mean, we're both Leos. We both love each other,
true.
I'm assuming here.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel the same way.
Okay,
I don't. I think I've said it before. You are such a talent. I'm so happy for your success, and I'm very happy to be on the show with you.
We're just here to build each other up. And honestly, I wanted to talk to you specifically about this David case because you have been covering it from the start. You know it inside and out. So let me start by asking you, are you surprised by the ruling after the prelim that this is going to be heading to trial?
Not surprised, because the bar for this case to move forward, whether there's sufficient probable cause to support the charges, is quite low. It's quite low. It's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Having said that, and this is something I do want to get into, there was a question for me whether the prosecution presented enough evidence at this stage to support first-degree murder and the special circumstances allegations. If you ask me, when it comes to the charge of continuous sexual abuse of a minor, when you talk about the alleged photos and text messages that were found on David's device or purportedly found on his device, that's enough. When you talk about mutilation of human remains, the alleged purchase history, the forensic material, the Tesla, the alleged Santa Barbara trips, seemed to be enough for me there. When it came to first-degree murder, and by the way, I interviewed Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman last night on my News Nation show. The defense raised some interesting questions about, you don't have the murder weapon. The chainsaws that were tested negative for blood. How do you know exactly what happened in the house? There was no surveillance footage. The Uber driver can't definitively say where he dropped Celeste off. There was no text messages before or communication before, or at least presented during the preliminary hearing, that David intended to kill Celeste, that Celeste seemingly invited herself over, and that she wasn't lured. There was a question of also, this idea that Celeste threatened David. Was there a self-defense argument? Did she do something to herself? I'm not saying any of that's going to work, but there was a question, did they present enough of first-degree murder and the special circumstances allegations of lying in wait and killing for financial gain and killing a witness, that I thought they were good arguments by the defense. So I was waiting to see that, but clearly at this point the judge said prosecution met the threshold. This now goes to trial, and a jury will have to decide these issues.
Okay, I want to talk about the defense there, because something that they pointed out that was so interesting when the medical examiner was on the stand, that they posed the question, is it possible that these wounds were self-inflicted, that Celeste did this to herself? Because, I mean, obviously we've reported on this. The remains were very decomposed. It wasn't, super fresh. So some of the things were kind of difficult to understand, whether this was a gunshot wound, whether it was a knife, whatever the alleged murder weapon would have been. So that was interesting. What do you think about the defense asking that question?
Their job is to raise reasonable doubt. First of all, their job in the preliminary hearing, I think they knew that they weren't going to have a successful argument to have all this tossed out, but they're starting to come up with a defense strategy, and they're going to poke holes and try to raise reasonable doubt wherever they can. So if you wherever that means. There's no murder weapon, there's decomposed remains, dismembered remains. Can you say that what exactly is the cause of death? What happened here? What's the manner of death? Now, one of the things they weren't successfully able to do in the preliminary hearing, but the judge did say this is something they might be able to explore at a trial, Celeste's potential mental health issues, whether she had a history of domestic violence. So it becomes a question, and I wonder if this is a narrative that they're going to put forward. She was erratic, she came over, she threatened herself, she did something to herself. The problem for the defense, and this is something that when I interviewed Nathan Hochman, he highlighted, and this is something that I thought about before, and I think the prosecution is going to do. Unless there's an eyewitness or surveillance footage, right, the defense is going to say, how can you know exactly what happened in that house, right? Maybe it was manslaughter, maybe it was self-defense. The problem is, if the prosecution can establish she arrived at this property at a certain time, and then 20 or so minutes later, David allegedly sends her a text, "Where are you?" The alibi text, right?
Yeah.
That would be a really fast time for someone to formulate that if this was purely a self-defense case. Oh my gosh, he fought for his life, killed Celeste in self-defense, and then so quickly comes up with the alibi text. Or let's say she does something to herself. She stabs herself, doesn't call emergency services, immediately sends an alibi text, "Where are you?" That's going to be the difficulty for the defense to suggest that this was anything other than a first-degree premeditated murder. Now, again, the defense will have an opportunity to present their arguments, and they will try to, highlight any inconsistencies or gaps in the medical examiner's testimony. But I think that time frame is what the prosecution will use to say, circumstantially, this is what happened in the case. This is why they say David just was there watching her bleed out. And I know there was a back and forth about, well, how long did it take Celeste to die? And I'm not trying to be cavalier by this. I'm just trying to explain what the information is. And I think they'll say, look at the time frame between the text and when she was dropped off. That tells us what happened in the house. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. And I mean, something that the defense did a really good job of pointing out is that there's no one who can definitively say that David was there at the time that Celeste died. We don't have a witness. We don't have, video camera showing all of this happening. However, we do have eventually his iPhone and his Tesla going back and forth to that Santa Barbara trip. And this is like good and bad, right? Because the defense says, okay, cool, it was his car and his phone, but was somebody else driving his car? Did somebody else have his phone? I mean, so that kind of evidence can work both ways, right?
Sure, and that'll be something that'll be explored, but then it becomes a question, why is that person not being prosecuted, right? If the question becomes, does the prosecution, their goal is to seek justice for Celeste. So whether that was allegedly David or someone else, they'll go after that person. It seems that it would be a difficult uphill battle for the defense, but again, we'll see what happens at trial, to suggest it was somebody other than David allegedly ordering all those materials to that property, that it was someone else driving his car, that it was someone else using the iPhone. It's maybe too much for a jury to accept, but again, we're in the early stages of this. One of the things I asked Nathan Hochman was, I laid out all the gaps. I said, do you have evidence that you haven't shared yet that's going to answer all this? And he goes, in a short answer, yes, we do. But he did say it's still a circumstantial evidence case, not a direct evidence case. So it doesn't, I don't think he's going to have an eyewitness who says, yeah, I saw David kill her. I don't think they have that. But to be clear, David's represented by excellent defense counsel. Blair Burke is excellent. And I thought some of the arguments that she made were really setting up important arguments that are going to be made if this goes to trial. So, it was interesting to see that.
Yeah, the defense is definitely doing their job here, for sure. But back to Hochman, actually, after all of this happened, the judge ruled, yes, this is going to go to jury trial. He had a press conference where he said, this was only a fraction of the evidence that we have, kind of what he alluded to on your News Nation show. And even though it may be circumstantial evidence, this is kind of a two-part question, Jesse. What do you think that evidence could be? This is speculation, by the way, but what's a possibility? And also, is that difficult for a jury to convict on circumstantial evidence alone?
No, it's not difficult if it's strong circumstantial evidence. They've done it before in so many different cases. It's not surprising the prosecution didn't present everything they possibly have at a preliminary hearing. They don't have to. They just have to present the bare minimum to get it to go forward. They don't want to taint the investigation. I wonder if it's a little bit of strategy in terms of what they're showing to the defense, even though they're supposed to hand over all their evidence to the defense as well. What I think it could be is witness testimony, right? We didn't hear from Neo Langston. We didn't hear from Asia Collins, two individuals who were purportedly in David's orbit. Neil Langston was reportedly arrested for failing to appear as a witness. We believe he testified in front of the grand jury. I'm curious what they would have to say if they're called as witnesses. Remember, one of the things in one of the prosecution's filing is that David allegedly lied to friends and associates about the smell of decomposition, right? The odor. Did we hear any testimony about that? I don't recall that in the preliminary hearing. There's a question about where's that missing chainsaw? They claim that David purchased 3 chainsaws. 2 of them that were found at the property tested negative for blood. Can you make the argument that the third one is what was used to dismember her body? Where is it? Is it in Santa Barbara anywhere? That's something I interviewed Steve Fisher about on Sidebar. So this is a rapidly investigated. I mean, they're continuing to get, I have to imagine they continue to get evidence in this case, and investigation's fluid. But those are the things that I wonder, are they going to have more from? And by the way, you and I both know the prosecutors, they were trying to subpoena David's family. For what purpose? What did they know about this alleged purported relationship? What can they say about the registration of the Tesla? What comments did David allegedly made to them, assuming there's no hearsay issue? So those are people that I think also may testify and may be part of the prosecution's case. But again, I don't think that they want to release more to the public than they have to at this point.
Right. I mean, there was so much evidence that was presented at the prelim that we didn't quite know yet, but I'm not surprised that they've got so much more in their back pocket, kind of ready for this to go to trial. And I'll be interested to hear who is called as witnesses, what sort of information is presented. All of that is going to be really intriguing. And I guess this kind of leads into my next question, the special circumstances of it all. Now, Hochman has come on the record and said, this is a death penalty eligible case. We don't know yet if we're going to seek that. The defense can put forth their argument, kind of paralleling the Nick Reiner situation to the special circumstances that enhance it. I know this is complicated because there is a moratorium in California. There hasn't been an execution in however many years. However, it's still something that LA County could pursue. So can you kind of talk a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. This is a weapon. This is an advantage for the prosecution to use. And even if you're on death row, your life is different than just being life in prison. The important part about this, and again, not to just self-promote, but I have to for this purpose.
You have to.
I interviewed Nathan Hochman. I asked him, you know, what we saw, I mean, we didn't see it. We were just reading the reporting on it. But these graphic photos of Celeste's body being dismembered, the allegedly graphic, sexually explicit photos and messages. You really want to put a jury through this? You really want a jury to see all of this about a 14-year-old girl? Do you want the family to go through this? Is there an avenue? Is there a path by which you would accept a plea deal in this case? Could you use the death penalty as a way for a bargaining chip? Like, David, we'll take the death penalty off the table if you plead guilty, right? He said to me, if David wants to come forward with the plea deal, we'd be open to that conversation. So I think that is something that is strategically being kept back. But also with any prosecution, the death penalty complicates a case because it takes longer, right? It's going to take longer to gather that evidence, present that evidence, different mental health experts, different mitigating factors. And also you have to get a jury that would be death penalty qualified. Easier said than done. It's one thing to get a jury who can decide whether someone is guilty or not guilty, but for them to be recommending death, it's not so simple. So this is a consideration they have to have. You know, they talk about with the family. Do you want, we go with the death penalty, particularly when there's a moratorium on executions as of right now, it could elongate this case. It could take longer. Is that what you want? If we don't go that route, we can get to trial sooner. So I think that that's something they have to consider as well.
I mean, it makes sense that both sides are being very tactful, that they have strategy going forth in all of this. So it'll be interesting to see what does happen there. If there is a plea deal, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised. So there are things going on behind the curtain that we don't necessarily know about. But we've talked a lot about this murder allegation, but I wanted to talk to you about the sexual assault allegation, because this to me seems really tricky for David to combat, because we've talked about this, the texts, the videos, if there is on record this alleged abortion situation. She obviously was only 13 or 14 when they were together. I mean, how does his defense deny that?
I don't have a great answer for that, because if this is true, what was presented at the preliminary hearing, and you know, this is why text messages and photos and videos are such compelling evidence, because unless they say, you know, it's not even that you can say, if there were just photos of Celeste, you know, I'm sorry to do this, but if there were sexually explicit photos of Celeste on David's device and that was it, and he was nowhere in the photos, could they say, you know, was it his phone? Was he using that phone? But they're basically saying they have proof that he engaged in sexual activity with her, that he's in the photos, that they're having conversations about sexual activity and about abortion. So it's going to be really difficult for him to get past that. Now, one of the things that came up is the defense seemed to suggest, what did she tell him about her age? What did he understand her age to be? The prosecution said, that's not a defense. That doesn't absolve you of liability. It doesn't matter what she said her age was. If you engaged in sexual activity with a minor over a period of time, that's it. I haven't seen any other legal argument to suggest they're wrong about that the prosecution's wrong about that. Which makes me wonder, is that going to be a charge that the defense says, listen, he'll plead guilty to it. We can't fight that. Is there some sort of deal that can be worked out here? I don't know, but I believe that charge in and of itself carries up to 16 years in prison. So that's going to be a really, really difficult one for him to fight against, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's an uphill battle for sure. But then on top of this, he's facing the first-degree murder charge, potentially the death penalty. There's a lot on David's plate right now, and I guess I'm going to wrap up by asking you, what do you think is next? I know he's due back in court on August 31st. What do you anticipate for that appearance, when the trial would be? What are kind of your hypotheses?
Yeah, it's the formal reading of the charges. It's the next step in the stage. But look, the prosecution is going to still mount their case. They're still going to ask for witnesses to come forward. They're going to start, trying to get everything in place. The defense has to now think about this preliminary hearing. What worked? What didn't? What did they learn? How do they prepare their defense? What witnesses do they want to call? And move forward. That's the kind of the interesting thing about the preliminary hearing, as opposed to a grand jury, which is secretive. It gives the defense an opportunity to test the prosecution's evidence and prepare their strategy moving forward. Look, and it'll also be a conversation about plea negotiations, but that's going to be up to David to determine, and I don't know what he's thinking. One of the interesting things that we had from our excellent reporting from Julia Deng was she said David was like straight ahead, like no emotion. I don't know what he's thinking right now. I don't know what he's thinking about this case. So look, that's what, as the case gets prepared, and could we see a trial 2027? Maybe. But I think this is something that has to be, I think that this is something that both the prosecution and defense have to prepare for and try to figure out their best arguments moving forward. And we don't even, it's so hard for me to say because we don't know all the evidence that they have.
And there's so much more that they have. You know that they do. Hochman told you yourself that he's got a lot more. So I guess we're going to have to just wait and see. Jesse Weber, thank you for your amazing reporting on this case from start to whenever the finish will be. We would love to have you back on Scandal to talk about it when more developments arise.
Thank you so much for having me. It'd be my pleasure to come back.
David is due back in court on August 31st for his arraignment. Because of the nature of the case, he could face the death penalty, but so far, the LA County DA says his team hasn't decided if they're going to pursue it. And that is where today's episode of Scandal leaves us for now. If you like what you saw and you want to see more or connect with me on social media, you can find me on places like Instagram @Sierra Gillespie. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. As always, I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.